Empowerment Week. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Please like, share, comment, and share this broadcast and follow my page. Today, I have my guest, Michelle Mabson, and Michelle is a staff scientist for Earth Justice and chief advocacy officer for Black Millenniums for Flint. And prior to joining Earth Justice, Michelle worked in the Office of Children's Health Protection at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, where she served as an Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education. So I'm excited to have her here to talk about climate change, which is a crisis, like just all around. So I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on to the Renee Adams Show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I am duly excited to be here as well. So talking climate change can get tough, and I'm excited.
Well, and you have, you definitely, through your bio, you've done a lot of research to really inform the public about what we're, facing right now in this climate change. So first, I would just want to start off by asking, why are you so studious in the study of environmental protection?
Right. That's a great question. And a lot of that actually stems from my upbringing. I have to credit my grandfather, my aunt. I would say my grandfather first, because even though I wouldn't necessarily consider him a traditional environmentalist, he was a medical doctor. He delivered babies at a time when segregation was still alive and well. So mostly working with Black women and seeing disparities in women having preterm births and low birth weight and all the kind of issues that can be associated with that, and not necessarily knowing why that's happening, though I think now we understand a lot of environmental causes, the things we're eating, the pollution we might be exposed to, the water we're drinking can also have an impact on those types of disparities. And then I would also say my aunt, who started an environmental justice organization in Harlem, New York, called We Act for Environmental Justice. She's a maverick. She is my shero, and working on this just from her lens has really been, I'd say, what's been pivotal for me, especially growing up. But I also realize there's a lot of studying that does come with that, a lot of research that needs to be understood about what's happening ecologically, what's happening to the earth in our natural environment, and then that nexus of how the built environment where we live, the places that we're exposed to, our cities, our communities, how those interact and help to either create healthy, thriving lives or can be burdensome and challenging and add to some health harms. And climate change is on top of all of that, because no matter whether you're human or not, or whatever species, we're all dealing with it and feeling the impacts. So it's the added pressure, I think, now that we're really feeling evenly, not equitably, I should say, across our world.
I think first off, I just want to say that it is so refreshing, Michelle, to have a not only beautiful, but educated woman of color that is a scientist that can better inform our community of what's happening right now. And for you to, put so much passion and dedication into the research. And once we really get into what you have really done on that part, I think people will really see, the change that you are really making, in our community and on this planet, which is significant. So I appreciate you for that. I hope everyone else does too, right?
Yeah. Definitely not alone in doing this work. It's so massive in terms of impact and reach. I'm really standing on the shoulders of so many greats and people that I get to work with pretty much day by day that really are the contributors. So I can shout out lots of people, but I'll just say it's definitely not alone. Thank you so much.
So from your standpoint and what we call a crisis our climate. Like, what are we actually facing? Like, what are we really facing right now in this time, and where we're headed in the next 5 or 10 years if we don't make that change?
Right. So sort of in the climate realm, there's sort of a spectrum of believers. Strangely enough, there are deniers, folks who don't believe climate change is real or that it's happening. And then on the other spectrum, you sort of have alarmists, people who recognize what's happening fairly rapidly and the consequences we're feeling now and that we're going to feel much later as well. And then you have folks in the middle. I'm certainly on the alarmist side because I think we're teetering at a tipping point that which we will continue to feel effects, whether that's stronger and more frequent storms. We look at Hurricane Katrina, right, and we look at Hurricanes Maria and Dorian and others that have devastated many communities across the US and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands in recent years. We look at wildfires in Australia and in California. We look at the fact that major cities, most of them are on the coast. Miami, New York, LA, San Francisco, Houston, like literally on all sides, you're looking across the world, you're looking at cities that were built near coasts that are experiencing sea level rise rapidly. And this idea and reality of climate refugees, literally people who've had to leave their homes where they have lived since the beginning of their history and have buried their loved ones and have all of their actual artifacts there because they are going to disappear under the water either soon or have already actually been happening, especially in Pacific Island nations. So
I'm sorry for cutting you off, but do you think that by it being mostly on the coast, that the climate change is affecting more of the coastline, or how is that? I mean, how should we look at that in regard to the coastline and all the hurricanes and everything that's happening?
Sure. I think a lot of us focus on the coast because of the hurricanes, the sea level rise, the fact that most major cities are, again, on the coast, and then upwards of 90% of the world's population lives in cities. And that's not to say that the Midwest and other areas that are in the US that are not surrounded by any coastlines are not impacted, because the frequency of storms, that includes tornadoes, will continue to go up. And so I think the other big issue there is scarcity of food, scarcity of clean water and access to clean water. I would say as times are changing, we're seeing our climatic zones change in ways in which we have to grow food differently. Right. And then also, unfortunately, diseases like the Zika virus and other viruses that we're very concerned about, where insects and animals can be vectors, as their habitats are either destroyed by climate change or destroyed by some other human mechanism, or as these climatic zones are shifting and our winters are much warmer, we see them able to survive longer and be vectors of these diseases as well. So there's many ways beyond sort of the physical nature of storms that climate change will impact, and I think even now is already impacting the ways in which we move about in our world, and the ways in which our health and safety is threatened especially as we're still a growing population in the world.
So in what ways do you feel that these to us, they seem to be new viruses? How are they able to be born through? And it seemed like it's because of the change that we're going through. Does that have any effect to do with the viruses that's like, because we're now seeing things that's coming from like China and places like that, where there is absolutely the highest pollution, on the planet. And now, we're about to face, a crisis with that as well. Like, where do you see us with this virus, the different viruses that's being born from the climate change?
Absolutely. It's terrifying, to say the least. For example, yes, the coronavirus is absolutely one I think we see with habitat destruction for many species that can be vectors of disease in growing cities and growing interactions with those same, those different species, whether they're monkeys or insects, whatever they may be, that they can be carriers of diseases that eventually adapt to be able to impact humans as well. So we've seen that in lots of viruses that we thought we've either eradicated or, and I don't know, this is not a vaccination discussion. I won't go there necessarily now, but diseases that we should not even be concerned about today are on the rise because of lack of vaccinations as well. But I'll give you an example that I found very startling. In Alaska, where the majority of the sort of earth is surrounded by permafrost, which is essentially a layer of the soil and earth that is deeply and permanently frozen. There were times where, now that the earth is warming, there are times where that permafrost is melting. And we're actually seeing that viruses can actually survive for a really long time, actually millennia and longer in frozen soil. And as they're being warmed, they're being reactivated. So we're seeing ancient viruses that have been able to be reactivated because of warming. They may have been viruses that impacted reindeer, let's say. And the anthrax virus is actually a really good example of that, because there's actually been some examples where reindeer that have died and been covered by the permafrost. Now with that melting, the virus is able to get into the groundwater and get into the soil and actually impact nearby communities. And so that I think we'll see happening in ways that we can't necessarily anticipate. Also, as climate change worsens, just changing environment that we don't know what that consequence will be on how we're able to survive in our livelihoods, but also the kinds of diseases, unfortunately, that we'll see evolving with that change.
Yes. And so as an advocate, like, what are you trying to get out to the public? Like, what information do you think need to be out and known for us to be aware of?
Yeah, a lot of the nexus or sort of intersections that I am concerned with are growing health disparities and growing disparities generally, especially in Black and Brown communities, and then the growing wealth gap, is that both are resource driven and also health driven. There are things that allow for the maternal mortality rate for Black women to be compared to, I hate to use the term third world countries, but countries that you just would not expect to have this type of disease mortality that we see for Black women here. We would see that elsewhere, we would expect. But we look at Detroit, we look at DC, we look at a lot of cities, and women are very unsafe when giving birth. And we've seen birth stories from folks like Serena Williams and Beyonce even, who have, from a wealth standpoint, that should not be a problem, but still somehow race is a factor that impacts our ability to have access to good healthcare, to be listened to by our healthcare providers when we say that there's a problem. So I think some of the takeaways for me are looking at the inequities around how these environmental burdens are distributed. The Flint water crisis, the North water crisis are both examples where we see Black communities that have pretty much been left behind and told, oh, at first there was no problem. And then lo and behold, lead is found just underneath the surface as they're finally looking to test. And then there's misinformation about how to go about eliminating lead from drinking water. You're not supposed to boil water, for instance, but some folks were told to boil water, which is very dangerous and can actually increase the amount of lead in water.
Why is it so dangerous?
So you think about boiling water when you're trying to boil out bacteria and kill anything like that, but lead is a heavy metal. So when you're boiling water, you're essentially, a lot of that water is going to be given off as steam. So there's less water by volume, and that you actually have access for drinking or using. The lead is still there. The lead content has not changed. So it can actually increase if you're like, okay, I have to boil a lot more water since it's going to be loss of steam. So that's more lead that you're actually exposed to.
Wow, that is interesting.
Yeah.
because you are told to boil the water. It's going to, knock out most of the bacteria. Is going to be
Right.
clear and all of this kind of stuff. So to know that it's actually more dangerous to boil the water because of the growth of lead.
Right, for the fact that lead is not going to be eliminated that way. And so that, and in fact, even hot water coming from pipes can make lead leach more readily. And so that kind of misinformation is really, it's not helpful when you're in an emergency situation, when you're just learning your water isn't safe to drink, and the right folks aren't giving you the information you need to be safe. To say at the very least, let your water run for a little while before you start to collect it and boil it, and things like that, or at least get access to bottled water. And we've seen the response be very slow. Flint to this day still does not have clean drinking water. And we are going beyond year 6 at this point since the crisis broke. And so a lot of local efforts have been done to meet the needs of the community. But again, another takeaway is that we have to be politically active and holding our elected officials accountable, because there's always that age-old saying, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So when we're not at the table actually helping to impact legislation or impact things happening even locally beyond national, it's a whole nother story. With those who have your best interest at heart, then your community is not getting the type of resources that it could be using during the time that someone's elected.
Let me ask you this. Because I noticed that you posted something not too long ago about most of the chemical plants are in Black communities, right? So if that's true, and we're more, we can be more prone to getting cancer and whatever else that comes from all this pollution. Like, what should be done before moving into these areas, or what should be done about the education of learning about these different chemical plants, and what could be done for us to take action? Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, that's complex, and I like that question. It's really that we've been in a lot of these places way longer than these facilities existed. There's this concept of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard, and a lot of white folks who have political power, political capital, if you will, have rallied to say, don't put that chemical facility in our neighborhood. And so by process of elimination, and literally there's evidence that shows that when facilities are being cited, that looking at political power, demographics of a community are part of what goes into that process. So even though they're not necessarily saying, okay, there are Black folks there, let's put it there, they're looking at a lot of factors that may be associated with being Black and possibly impoverished, that means that they think they'll get less pushback. And historically, that's been the case. And so they're in these communities, and by the time you turn around, your house is worth tens of thousands of dollars versus hundreds of thousands of dollars that it could be worth. And so quite literally, some communities are stuck because all of their equity is in a home that cannot be sold, can't pick up and start your life over. Communities that have been on their land since well after slavery, and have been working on that land and owning that land for a really long time. I think if you have generations of
lies built into all of that too.
What's that?
A lot of lies built into all of that too.
Oh, absolutely. It's really disturbing. And beyond cancer and asthma, I think there's issues around feeling like there's not much you can do. Some of these facilities try and buy out homes, but they don't buy them at the value at which they were bought in the first place. So again, it's like being stuck. And these are some of the most dangerous facilities. They explode and can cause a need to evacuate. They impact emergency responders and those who are coming in contact when there's an emergency and having to go to the hospital or possibly even die. A lot of schools are located very close to these facilities. And so children are supposed to be able to kind of think of the compounding issues of how is their neurodevelopmental and cognitive development being impacted by being exposed to some of these pollutants daily? There are studies that show that this absolutely impairs educational attainment for students and children living in these areas. So part of that really looks like holding these facilities accountable, because they're able to essentially emit, let's say if it's a coal power plants or something of that nature, then they contribute to the state economy in a really significant way. And so a part of the zoning issues that come at play they have to be taken up politically and through legislation, and holding again our elected officials accountable. And if they're not doing their job, then getting them out of office and essentially getting who you need in office to take away the ability for these facilities to be polluting, and to ask for enforcement and compliance, because a lot of these facilities just throw money at a problem as opposed to fixing these issues.
Right. And the good thing is that the political parties are getting a lot more diverse.
Right.
Would be good in our benefit, because we do need more people who are advocates, like the Malcolm X's and people like that can get out and really take action or help to motivate, get this movement. Because at the end of the day, if we do not do something, we have to take action. We have to become more studious about, our environment and what's causing these certain things, instead of just allowing it to just happen. Because all of a sudden we're now hearing about this newborn virus that is coming from China that now we have to be confronted with. And you already see people wearing face masks, right? And we would be smart to start wearing it instead of trying to be so cute, and wearing a face mask and start taking action and being more studious about more of the environmental protection and what's harming our environment. And we already know some of the causes, but we also know that the air is being polluted by all these different chemicals too, that from over time is affecting all of it in some kind of way. And no one's talking about it. It's not going to be talked about until people start getting sick and wondering why these new diseases and viruses are coming up, and the death toll is a lot higher than it's ever been on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, this year alone, in the last 2 years, I think actually, the life expectancy in the US, as opposed to going up, has gone down. And that's been the first time in over a century since we've begun tracking life expectancy that has been the case.
It's alarming. It's huge. It really is. It's alarming because it's happening in so many different ways, but it's coming from it's coming from our environment and our food. I mean, the environment is basically affecting the food. It's affecting the water. It's affecting all of this, everything around us. And then, and one another, we're affecting one another because we're infected. So, the only way that we can really, be advocates of our planet is by being studious and taking action ourselves. With anything that we can do on our end would be it will be ideal. And I just think that all of us, we should be looking out for our planet, because this is where we live. So yeah, I really love that, because I love what you do. But the one thing that is really important is not only are you just talking about it, you're actually doing something about it. You've been in different countries like Mexico, Morelos, Mumbai, India, places like that. And you've been to East Antarctica on the ice sheet, actually doing research. So, I mean, you are the real deal, like scientists, like out here really getting the information and putting it out there. And I appreciate everything that you're doing. And when we talk about these different countries, the one question that I wanted to ask is, from you visiting these different countries, what has been like really significant to you in the way that you're feeling like, okay, so this country is being affected by this and is creating this, and this country is I'm seeing this from my research and it's going to create this, to where it can possibly just all come together in some kind of way that can create a more harmful. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it can just be more harmful. Like where have you, like just talk about just where you've been and some of your findings.
Yeah. So I like that you brought up the work in Mumbai, India, because I think out of anywhere I've ever visited, and this is true even for anyone, if you just sort of Google and say, well, what's happening in India? It is be in a very dire situation with air pollution, specifically because of a lot of the ways in which they're generating energy coming from coal fire power plants, and cities that have so many people living, and the wealth gap being so great where most people actually don't live in physical structured either homes or anything of that sort. They live in shanty towns or under freeways and wherever a person can find the space. So in seeing that, there's now an economy growing around selling clean air, quote unquote. That you can literally go to a lounge and pay to put on a face mask and breathe clean oxygen. Wow. And this is marketed as a way for people to breathe easier, be healthier, which is completely a misnomer, because at the end of the day, once you step back outside, you're just as impacted by the fine particulate matter and other pollution as you were before you got inside. It's not a solution by any means, and it's actually predatory in some ways because of how much money a person would have to spend in order to have access to that quote unquote cleaner air. And so one of the reasons I was actually in Mumbai was working with Kellogg Company, trying to look at sort of from their business model. They procure a lot of their corn for everything from cornflakes and everything else that they make from places in India. And they wanted to understand, well, what were some of the challenges that farmers would be facing as climate change impacts are felt? And what could they do? Like what assistance and needs could possibly be thought of as potential solutions to help sort of mitigate some of those impacts and basically not affect Kellogg's bottom line. So some of the work was looking at water quality and the fact that clean water and arable land was becoming harder to find. Other issues around just having transportation that was reliable, getting the energy needed and transportation needed to get your grain to market was an issue, and certainly heat and just general issues around rain and the lack of rain in some areas created a lot of issues as well. There's no sprinkler, most of these places, none of them, at least that I saw, had sprinkler systems or any other access aside from well water, which is dwindling as well.
So, do you feel like
so that's huge.
Over here, do you feel like in the US we could be more in danger because the water that we have is, opposed to other countries? Because we look rich. We look like we have it all. We have the water. We look like we're feeding all these millions of people. But do you feel like we're really harming one another because, or this is harming us, our natural resources, per se? Do you feel like it's harming us more because it really is polluted and now we're polluting and infecting ourselves?
Yeah, I think a couple ways to look at that are we're not doing enough to protect the natural waters that we do have. Unfortunately, this administration, the Trump administration, has done the worst as far as basically declassifying waterways that would be protected from waste and other kinds of harmful contaminants getting into the water. They allow for more oil drilling in more pristine places where water is not yet contaminated. I mean, even when you think of a place like Michigan, which has all of the Great Lakes, which have all more fresh water than any other place in the entire world. Again, for a place like Flint, an issue like Flint to be at play, it makes no sense. But even beyond some of the water issues, I think we are facing some potential constraints just around food production. We know that no matter whether you're a person who eats organic, many women, when they're tested, have dozens of chemicals that are constantly in our bodies, whether it's from hair products and face products, fragrances, foods that we're eating. Our fish have microplastic in them, so we have plastic that we're ingesting because we don't properly recycle, and these facilities also spew plastic into the oceans. And so basically we're also being impacted by the food that we're eating. So I think some of those consequences, we don't even know how bad it can get, unfortunately. And being informed about
our genetics then turn into our embryos, and we're now it's in their system, and whatever is hereditary, right? It kind of recreates itself over and over again if we continue to do the same thing or eat the same stuff. But I think when we talk about things being hereditary, it's something that was already done in the past, and now we're carrying it on to our children and our babies and things like that, to where now it's already something already located, and it's residing inside of you. It only needs to breathe. So whatever you feed it, it's going to come alive, and now the sickness is here, and it could be inevitable, pretty much.
Right. Yeah, that's especially the case with lead. I mean, it absolutely passes the placental blood barrier. Unfortunately, lead is really insidious because it is a metal, and like that, it's similar to calcium. So if you are calcium deficient, lead actually gets absorbed into our bones. And for pregnant women, that's especially harmful because if you have lead stored in your bones, part of the way in which bones are fortified for the fetus and the growing baby is actually through a release of calcium from your bones. So your bones actually release a bunch of calcium, but also lead if it's stored there too. And so even if you don't have a current exposure to some lead in your water or in paint or something else, legacy exposure in your body actually can contribute to lead levels in the growing fetus and growing baby.
Wow.
So they're harmed before birth.
Is this more of what a concern, and when you go out and study is the lead in these natural resources?
Yeah, lead is a powerful neurotoxin. That means it is the first place it's really impacting is brain development. And so that's especially harmful for kids and for infants and for the fetus, because one of the biggest indicators or sort of associations that we think of with lead exposure is IQ decrement. So quite literally, certain levels of lead can decrease your IQ level. That's been documented in many studies and validated. And so not only does that make it harder to learn, harder to retain information, you can also develop ADHD and autism. We also see associations with or sort of auditory and sensory issues as well, and developmental issues. And so that impacts a child's ability to learn and to sit still in class and to be a studious person over time. So it's a pretty, it's one particular chemical that has no place in our body because of how it interacts with our bones, with our blood, et cetera.
Okay. And so what kind of things, again, as you are the, an advocate for climate change, what are some of the things that you want people to change? How do you see us changing to change the climate or help change the climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because, yes, we can make our own individual daily contributions to mitigate climate change. If you do live in a city, trying to reduce your carbon footprint is absolutely possible. We know carbon is what is contributing to climate change. And so anytime we're not trying to drive less and use public transportation, walking more, biking more, that's absolutely helpful. I think the local food movement, which can also be a food justice movement in and of itself, is pretty incredible. We look at places like Detroit, where because it's a city that was made for 2 million and it's now got 600,000 people, there's a lot of open land, a lot of land that is now being used to grow foods locally and to have farms and to allow our animals into a city, which we don't normally think about, but makes a lot of sense. And so that also reduces our carbon footprint. But I think more broadly, it is holding our decision makers accountable, because these broader issues with these legacy chemical factories and big conglomerates that invest in that, including banks, need to be held accountable. I mean, at this point, we need really big solutions.
Right.
And so we need to be moving toward a 100% clean economy, renewable energy economy, whatever energy, mixed use energy makes sense for wherever you are, whether it's solar or wind or hydrothermic. It really is, geothermic or hydraulic. There's a lot of things out there that can work more locally. And cities have done an incredible job. I mean, a lot of local areas have banded and said, well, we have our own goals, even if the US is no longer a part of the climate accord and Paris Accord. So we see a lot of that work continue to move forward, even if nationally and this administration, there's not interest there. And that's, I think, very encouraging.
Very good. Very good. Really well said. I love it. I think that this broadcast is very informative, and I know it's not a lot of this kind of talk going on. So I'm hoping that it encourages and it actually put more of us in movement and action to actually be able to help control some of it. That's
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it may not impact us today, and if you feel it, but our grandkids and their children, like the type of issues that they're going to be dealing with, we have to care. We have to, because their livelihoods depend on it, even more so than ours.
Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely. So is there like a website that people can go on to get more information or learn about what you're doing in the community?
Yeah. So I'll share two. For the hat that I'm wearing today, Black Millennials for Flint, we actually have a community action summit that we do during the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference, which happens every year in DC, the CBC week. So that'll be in September. And it's called Young, Gifted, and Green. And the website for Black Millennials for Flint is blackmillennials4 flint.org. And otherwise, you can also Google BM4F. Again, that's the number 4. And so a lot of that work that we're doing in Flint, in Memphis, Tennessee, as well as Baltimore and DC, you'll be able to find out and follow what we're doing, which is some really incredible work in those cities. And then in my other hat, I work as a staff scientist at Earth Justice, which is an environmental law firm that is also a nonprofit that works on issues related to protecting the wilderness and the oceans, promoting clean energy and the impacts of climate change, but also from the healthy community standpoint, clean air, clean water, and just access to a healthy environment. So earthjustice.org, you can find out what we're doing, the lawsuits. We have hundreds against the Trump administration currently, where we're trying to keep them accountable to protect public lands, and to protect communities from chemical explosions and from refineries that can explode and emit terrible air pollution. So
very good. So yes, that was great information. Thank you so much, Michelle, again, for what you're doing and just being the advocate that you are, just doing your part, basically.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not, again, not alone. Like I said earlier, a lot of folks are dedicated to this work. A lot of the communities are dedicated to this work, and that's the story that I think is most important to tell, is what's happening in someone's place in their own backyard. Because there's, even whether or not we see it on social media or in the news, like people are working really hard on the ground every single day to protect their community. And so being able to highlight those stories too is what we try to do with Black Millennials for Flint.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for all the information you gave.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I just want to leave off by just saying that if anyone wants to be on the Renee Adams Show, you can reach out to me if you have an inspiring story, or if you have a product or service that you would like to promote, you can inbox me. I would love to chat with you. I'm always looking for guests. And please like, share, and comment this broadcast. Find Michelle with the incredible things that she's doing. Follow just to keep informed on what's going on with the climate, and jump in. And, you know, we can all make a change in what's going on or happening around us. So I appreciate all your support. Thank you again, Michelle, for coming on. And I will see you guys in a few weeks. So thank you so much, guys, and I will see you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well,
Bye.
bye.